This week it was announced that the government would seek to make internet giants like Facebook and Google pay local media organisations to use their content. But exactly how would that work? What will it look like? Well, to explore that, we have Ariel Bogle, the ABC's technology writer within the ABC Science Unit, joining us from her house, and Seamus Byrne from the BYTESIDE Podcast Network. So, lay it out for me. Exactly how would it work?
What it means is a very big question because similar actions have been attempted in Spain, Germany and France. Not exactly the same thing, but similar types of efforts to get these sort of social media giants and search giants to pay into the sort of local media ecosystem to help sort of support local news. And in those other cases, they've essentially kind of cut off Google News and things like that rather than pay any money. And so through that process, they're seeing a big standoff where it's potentially impacting those kinds of companies negatively because they're not actually getting any of that search traffic that they otherwise would. So it's very complicated, but the big thing here was that we have essentially moved very quickly from a plan that was all about making a voluntary agreement between the media industry, the ACCC, and the big internet giants, and then the decision has been made to turn it into a mandatory agreement that the government wants to sign into law not long after July.
Yeah, so Ariel, how did it end up becoming mandatory? Because I feel like Facebook very nearly bought off every media organisation by giving them money to do Facebook Live shows. So how did we end up with this situation where the government are now making, or at least talking about something that's mandatory?
As Seamus outlined, this was originally meant to be a voluntary code. I know that negotiations were ongoing between Google and different news outlets, between Facebook and different news outlets, and there was some questions even then about the power of different news organisations. So would News Corp, because it has that weight and heft, be able to negotiate a better deal than, say, a small indie publisher? And it's not quite clear at the moment why the government has shifted so quickly to this mandatory model, but maybe it's because of the innumerable media outlets and country newsrooms that have shut up shop in recent months because of coronavirus. Not to bring it back to coronavirus, but unfortunately there we are. Yes, advertising has dried up, which has really dented a lot of newsrooms, and perhaps seeing all those outlets shut their doors, maybe that propelled the government to action. It's not really clear, but no matter the case, now the ACCC is going to be asked to do something huge and somewhat unprecedented in a matter of months. So I'll be very interested to see how it plays out.
I think a lot of people might get confused about that idea that, on Google, news appears in search. Companies can block themselves from being in search as it stands right now. So, it's not that companies want to not be visible. They want that visibility. But there are questions more than around how much reuse is okay. So, there's things like, in Google News, they might use a much larger snippet of the news and essentially, and funnily enough, you might not believe this, Marc, but a lot of people, when they read news on the internet, they don't actually read the details. They just read the headline and then they start talking about it without reading the full article. And that's the big issue is how much is Google News just kind of presenting enough news that people don't even bother clicking through? And how do you ensure that that balance is right? I don't feel like without some really, really amazing magical deal down this perfect kind of balancing act, that the internet companies are ever going to plan to just hand over some money in exchange for doing what they do everywhere else for free.
I think it's interesting too that news outlets lose a lot of their brand identity on these platforms. I think Seamus mentioned before, people don't necessarily read the whole article when they find it on social media. Neither do they recognise the brand necessarily, say it's The Guardian or the ABC. If you read it on Facebook, you might not even register. So there's a loss of brand recognition there happening as well. It's interesting to look too at different models. Facebook and Google aren't the only digital giants in the whole world. I always come back to South Korea because I find it quite interesting. There's a digital company like the Google of Korea, if you want to call it that, called Naver. And they've had a strong relationship with news outlets from the start, a contentious one, but they actually have been paying news outlets for quite a while now to display their articles on their homepage. So there is some recognition there that Naver's value and its sort of centrality to the internet experience, the place where you click when you want to find out what's going on, just like people turn to Google to find out what's going on during this pandemic, is really built off quick, easy, free access to news content, and that deserves a price. So in Korea, they actually have worked out a price, although from what I understand, news outlets always think that there should be more handed over to them from advertising revenue and other things, but it's not like free content is the norm in every country.
All right, there is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show. You can find it right now wherever you podcast. Thanks, guys.